One day I was kind of just messing around on Google Maps, and given I'm a hiker, I'm a mountain guy, I decided to poke around this random small town in Colorado, the one you're looking at right now. And as I was using Street View to kind of just see what was there, well, I saw something that sent chills up my spine. It's this building right here. I had seen this building before, and the truth is that this pretty normal looking building, as well as the normal looking town and mountains that surround it, well, they all have an extremely dark past. This is the kind of story that's gonna get me accused in the comments of like making it all up, right? Because it's just so crazy. But the twist, the clinker, you could say, of this story is so insane that it's the kind of thing you can't even really make up in the first place. And so with that said, let's take a virtual trip together right now to the town of Silver Plume, Colorado. This trip is totally free, but you gotta hit that subscribe button to cover your admission, especially if you're a repeat viewer of the channel. And if you're already subscribed, then you can just go ahead and give that like button a little tap, and that will cover your admission. Okay, the town of Silver Plume is the place where one of the strangest outdoor mysteries in Colorado history, hell, even you could say US history, took place. You see, back in June of 1988, a man named Keith Reinhard moved to the town of Silver Plume, and he moved there with some huge dreams and a lot of pressure to make them come true very quickly. You see, Keith was in the middle of a classic midlife crisis. He was almost 50 years old. He had a very successful career as a sports writer back in his hometown of Chicago suburbs, I should say. He had a family, a beautiful wife, children. He kind of had the classic American dream going for him. But he wanted something new. He was getting older, but he still had energy. He still had some life left in him. His body was still working fine, but he knew that those things weren't going to last forever. He kind of felt like his time was running out in a sense, and so it was now or never. If he was going to try to accomplish these goals, these dreams that he had to do it now, or his opportunity was going to be gone. And so Keith moved to Silver Plume with 3 specific goals in mind. The first goal was to get himself in better shape and become more comfortable in the wilderness by hiking. Because you got to understand, as you saw at the beginning of the video, Silver Plume is right in the heart of the Colorado mountains, the Rocky Mountains. The town is literally sandwiched in a valley with giant mountains on all sides, so it's the perfect place for Keith to accomplish this goal. But he had 2 other goals that were probably a little bit more important. And the first goal was to start and run a successful antique store. And his last goal, again, Keith was a journalist as his day job back in Chicago. And so his last goal was to write a novel, a fiction novel. And this goal was very, very important to him. The only problem was that he just didn't know what to write about yet. And so when Keith first arrived in Silver Plume, he found out that there was a vacant storefront that was looking for a new tenant right on Main Street, the perfect location to set up something like an antique shop. This was great news for Keith because he wasn't just trying to casually run this shop, just as something to do. He was really, really hoping that it would be a financial success, because if in the 3 months that he was planning on spending in Silver Plume, he could make enough money from this shop, well, then he could go back to his wife and his family in Chicago and be like, hey guys, I was able to start this successful business. Maybe we can just move to Silver Plume full time. Keith much preferred to be in the mountains of Colorado than to be back in the suburbs of Chicago. And so it was very, very important to him that he was successful in this financial endeavor. And he also had some extra motivation to make his shop succeed. That was because one of his best friends in life, named Ted Parker, owned a cafe right across the street from this retail space that Keith was now going to be renting out, again, right on Main Street. So within the first few days of Keith arriving in Silver Plume, it's a very small town, as you probably could see on Google Maps. There's not a whole lot going on. There's a few people that live there, and very quickly, Keith is able to talk to most of these residents. And when he does this, he learns some very, very disturbing news. Again, word spreads very fast in small towns like Silver Plume. And what Keith found out within just a few days of moving there, well, it would go on to basically reshape the rest of his life and legacy. It's very disturbing. And so before I get there, I do just want to take a deep breath and pause and tell you about something much less disturbing, lighten the mood. That thing is Drink Element. So Drink Element is the sponsor of this video. Now, if you're going to be in Colorado hiking or hiking anywhere else or doing any exercise, anything that makes you sweat, you need to know about Drink Element. It's great to hydrate, and replace the water when you're sweating and stuff like that, but that's really not enough. What you need to do is replace the water and replace the electrolytes that you sweat out, because if you don't do this, you're gonna get muscle cramps, you're gonna get fatigued. It's really just not good. Pretty much all of the other electrolyte drink mixes that you could potentially get, if you just go into the grocery store and look at what they have on the shelves, well, all of those are probably full of sugar and just BS, I always call it. Just full of BS that you don't really want to put in your body. And this is where Element stands out. Element has no sugar, it has no BS. All it has is the electrolytes that you need to stay hydrated and healthy, your magnesium, potassium, your sodium, of course, and it also has an incredible taste. And you might not believe me when I say that, and so I'm gonna give you a chance to call me on this. If you click the link at the top of the description or go to drinkelement.com/KyleHatesHiking, that's drinklmnt.com/KyleHatesHiking, and you make a purchase through that link, you're gonna get a sample pack of 8 additional Element flavors thrown in with your order for no extra cost. And so you can really see if I'm just making this up right now, because you're gonna get to try all the flavors. So one more time, that's drinklmnt.com/KyleHatesHiking, or click that link in the description. And now let's get back to the story. So when Keith began talking to the residents of Silver Plume, he was told that a few months prior, I'm talking September 7th, 1987, a man named Tom Young closed up his bookshop, which was right on Main Street. He grabbed his dog, and then he vanished forever. He told everyone that he was going to be gone vacationing in Europe, and so a few weeks went by before people really realized that anything was wrong, before they realized that Tom was missing. 9 months later, by the time Keith arrived in town, still no sign of Tom or his dog had ever been found. Eventually, the search was halted, and, well, the owner of the building that Tom Young was using to run his bookshop out of, he couldn't just let that building sit vacant anymore. He needed to find a new tenant. And so he put that building back on the market, back up for rent. And as it would turn out, Keith Reinhard was the one that would end up renting that very building next. Now, for most people, this would probably be very disturbing, but, there's not a whole lot you could really do at that point, right? For Keith, however, things were much different. Again, one of his major goals in moving to Silver Plume, in having this 3 months kind of by himself, surrounded by the mountains, this peaceful setting, one of his goals is to write this novel. And he didn't know what he was going to write about until he learned about the story of Tom Young's disappearance. Keith became obsessed with Tom Young, obsessed with finding out what happened to him, speculating. Keith decided that he was going to base his novel around the story of Tom Young. And so as soon as he makes this decision, Keith began going around to everybody in town and just peppering them with questions about Tom Young, about that day that he disappeared, about what he was like before he disappeared, all these things. He's trying to gather as much information as he possibly can. And Keith's friends and his family, and as well as the people around town, really began to take note about how obsessed Keith was with this story. And again, Keith is occupying the same building that Tom was occupying right before he disappeared. Keith is so immersed in this story, and he ends up creating a character, the main character for his novel, that was named Guy Gypsum. Now, Guy Gypsum was a blend of Keith himself and Tom Young. And it really appears that Keith spent a lot of time and mental energy trying to develop this character, almost to the point where friends and family of Keith, when they would speak to him, began to have a hard time telling if Keith was actually being himself in those moments, or if he was trying to actually be Guy Gypsum. It was almost like this like tortured artist kind of thing where he's trying to live through this character that he's developing in order to help his novel. Nobody knows exactly what was going on with this, but it's just clear that Keith, again, in the middle of this midlife crisis, is just obsessing over this case to the point where it's pretty much taking over his life. Keith spent 2 months, his first 2 months in Silver Plume, developing this novel, obsessing over Tom Young's story, and then on July 31st, 1988, there was a few hunters who were up on the slopes of Republican Mountain, which is just outside of Silver Plume. They were out there scouting for the upcoming hunting season when they stumbled across a very, very disturbing scene. They found a human skeleton as well as a dog skeleton, both with bullet holes through their skulls. They also found a revolver laying right next to these two skeletons. Now, Tom Young had apparently purchased a handgun just a few days before he went missing, and so obviously the connection was there. This is only a few miles as the crow flies from the main street of Silver Plume, and it isn't long before these remains are confirmed to have been those of Tom Young. And of course, given the scene, given the fact that a revolver was there, the dog had been shot as well, it was obviously ruled that Tom Young had taken his own life. That's what killed him. Now, this was obviously a massive deal in the town of Silver Plume. Everyone's paying attention, but nobody's paying more attention than Keith Reinhard himself. Again, he's been developing this novel. He's been living through this Guy Gypsum character that was very, very closely tied to Tom Young. All of a sudden, Tom Young has been found. There's been a manner of death ruled. It almost seems like a conclusion to Keith's novel is now kind of right there in front of his face. This is a massive, massive deal. And then, 1 week after Tom Young's body was found, Keith closed up his antique shop a little bit early, right around 3 o'clock, and then he walked across the street to his friend Ted's cafe. He goes in there, he talks to Ted, and he tells him that he's gonna go hiking up Pendleton Mountain, which, just like Republican Mountain, is right outside of town. I mean, just a few miles from Main Street to the summit of Pendleton Mountain as the crow flies. Keith tells Ted that he's going on this hike, and he tells him that if he's not at work the next morning, then Ted should call for rescue. And Ted didn't really take him seriously. He didn't believe him. First of all, it was very late in the day. It was after 3 o'clock at this point. Keith was also known to not really enjoy hiking alone. You know, he had hiked before, but he wasn't like a super experienced hiker. And he also didn't have any hiking gear with him. He wasn't wearing boots. He didn't have a backpack, a water bottle, or a map or compass. He didn't have any of those things. And so Ted literally thinks that Keith is joking. He's like, yeah, whatever, dude. You know, have fun on your hike. I'll see you tomorrow. Keith then leaves Ted's shop, and in a very strange twist to this story, he started to go around to everybody in Silver Plume and told them the same thing, that he was going on this hike up Pendleton Mountain. He was about to leave. And just like Ted, the rest of the people in town either didn't care or they just didn't believe him for the same reasons I just explained a second ago. Keith's just going around town telling everyone about this hike. He really made it a point to tell everyone about this hike. And then around 4:30 in the afternoon, Keith was seen walking away from Silver Plume in the direction of Pendleton Mountain, and then he was promptly never seen again to this day. Ted and the rest of the town of Silver Plume realized that Keith isn't there. He's not in his shop like he usually is. The shop's not open. They realized that maybe he was actually serious about going on this hike that nobody believed. And maybe something had gone wrong. Maybe he was still on the mountain. And true to his word, Ted decides to call in rescue, just like Keith had asked him to do the previous afternoon. A search for Keith was launched. And folks, you got to remember, this is less than a year after Tom Young went missing. So this town already had a massive search and a really big missing persons case. And so they're not messing around. They want to find Keith. They're not holding back at all. And an organization called Alpine Rescue Team was actually brought in because it was assumed that Keith had gone missing on the mountain. And though I'm sure Keith's friends and family were very worried that he was missing, when they found out that Alpine Rescue Team was going to be searching for him, this probably brought at least a little bit of relief, because Alpine Rescue Team was at the very top when it came to search and rescue. In fact, in their 30-year history up until this point, they had a perfect record. They had never not found somebody that they set out to search for. They used helicopters, over 100 people searching on the ground, 12 search dogs. I'm telling you, they went all out. And while the searchers were out combing Pendleton Mountain, Keith's friends and family began to search through his personal belongings and his workspace to try to find any clues about what might have happened. And when they did this, well, it only seemed to deepen the mystery of Keith's disappearance. When Keith's friends approached his workspace, they found the exact location where Keith had been working on his novel, working to develop this Guy Gypsum character. And next to his computer was a newspaper that was opened up to the headline, sitting right there next to where he was writing this novel, opened up to the headline, which read, quote, "Tom Young's body found." Naturally, the next step was to actually search Keith's computer itself. And on this computer is where they found Keith's novel. Though the novel was not yet finished, the final 3 sentences that Keith had written must have just sent chills up everyone who read its spine. I mean, in the middle of this search for Keith, right after he went missing, they all read these 3 lines that went like this. Quote, "Guy Gypsum changed into some hiking boots and donned a heavy flannel shirt. He understood Tom now and his motivation. Guy closed the door, then walked off towards the lush, shadowless Colorado forest above." Keith Reinhard would go on to break Alpine Rescue Team's 30-year record. They never found him. He was the first person they never found. They searched so hard for about a week until the search was finally called off after, tragically, a search plane ended up crashing and killing one of the pilots. And to this day, no sign of Keith has ever been found. But that doesn't mean that there hasn't been a lot of theories floated around about what the hell happened to him. And so I'm going to present a few of those to you now, and I'll leave it up to you to comment which one of these theories, or maybe a theory that I missed or that you came up with. I'll leave it up to you to comment what you think actually happened. I'm going to start with what I think is the most likely scenario. So again, when Keith arrived in Silver Plume, he had this ambition to move his family there. And in order to do that, his antique shop had to be profitable, because he couldn't go back to his wife and tell her that his business had failed, but they should still move anyway. Obviously, that wasn't going to happen. He had to go back to his wife and family and tell them that he had a successful business and that they should move to Silver Plume in order to pursue it. They'll be able to support themselves there. But as it turns out, Keith's antique shop had not been profitable. And after 2 months of this, it must have been abundantly clear to Keith that he was not going to be able to return to Silver Plume. The Silver Plume dream was absolutely crushed. And once again, Keith is going through this midlife crisis. This is probably not the news that he wanted to hear. And so the theory goes that just like Tom Young had done, this guy that Keith had been obsessing over, well, Keith went around town that day telling everyone that he was going on this hike to kind of be a diversion so that he could go off somewhere else and then take his own life. And it's been speculated that Tom Young did this same thing when he told everyone that he was going to Europe, when in reality he was found, just a couple miles outside of town. It seems most likely that Tom Young did commit suicide, and to me it seems very likely that Keith, just being so obsessed with this and living through this character he was developing, and then learning that Tom Young had ended his life, it seems likely that Keith just did the same thing. However, I will say that Keith's family and many of the residents in Silver Plume who had gotten to know him do not believe that Keith ended his own life. Again, all these theories, including the theory I just put forward, it's all speculation. And so that kind of brings us to our second theory, which I do think has some merit. And this theory is that Keith and or Tom as well died as a result of foul play. This theory always comes back to some sort of motive related to the space that Keith and Tom had been renting, right? Because they were both in the same shop before they went missing. Maybe there was something to do with that space that was a little shady, and both Keith and Tom found out too much, and therefore they were disappeared, unalived, whatever, because of that. Or maybe Tom Young was actually murdered for that reason or another reason, and then Keith, because he was doing all this digging into Tom Young's story for his novel, well, maybe Keith began to actually realize that Tom Young had been murdered. Maybe Keith had learned a little bit too much about this, and then Keith was disposed of in order to prevent him from blowing the case wide open. And again, that's all speculation, but I do want to note two things that are a little suspicious about Tom Young's death. So first of all, Tom Young and his dog were found next to this revolver, which was presumably used to end their lives. However, the revolver had been laying there next to their bodies for an entire Colorado winter. It had been there for 9 months by the time it was found. And so it was actually too eroded and damaged for investigators to do ballistics tests on it. Therefore, it was never conclusively proven to be the weapon that actually ended Tom Young and his dog's lives. Oh, and speaking of Tom Young's dog, well, those that were close to Tom found it very, very surprising that he had apparently shot his dog before shooting himself, because Tom was known to be a great dog owner. He loved his dog so much, and his friends and family just didn't think that he had it in him to kill his dog. Like, even if he wanted to take his own life, why would he bring his dog and take his dog's life too? A lot of people found that very suspicious. There's so much mystery in this story that I absolutely understand why all these different theories and details are being dissected. But I don't think that we can discount the potential theory that Keith simply had an accident in the backcountry, and that's why he disappeared as well. I mean, sure, there might have been foul play or he might have taken his life, but there's also a decent chance that Keith, again, going through this midlife crisis, just made a impulsive decision to go hiking on this day, a very bad decision because he didn't have the right gear and he was starting super late in the day. He didn't have a headlamp or a flashlight, but for whatever reason, he just made this decision to go hike, and then he either got lost in the dark after the sunset, or he fell, or something happened accidentally, and then he was just never found. This is certainly plausible because despite the extraordinary efforts by Alpine Rescue Team and the rest of the searchers, these are the Rocky Mountains we're talking about. This is very difficult terrain. It's thick. There's tons of trees, tons of crevices, and it's certainly plausible that even with the most professional search that you could possibly do, Keith still fell through the cracks and his body just wasn't found. But once again, I've said this a few times, I'm going to say it again, this is all speculation. Until Keith's body or his clothing or anything he had with him is found, we're never going to know exactly what happened to him. And so, if any of you ever go hiking near the town of Silver Plume, keep your eyes peeled. Keep your eyes peeled for anything out of the ordinary, because you never know when you might accidentally hike yourself right into the answer of a 30-year-old mystery. Folks, my give back call out for this video is obviously going to be Alpine Rescue Team. They are still a organization going strong today. Search and rescue groups like Alpine Rescue Team are the unsung heroes of the backcountry. They risk their lives in order to save people out in the woods, which is very heroic and brave. And so I've made a donation to them. I have their link in the description, and I encourage you to do the same as well, even if it's just a couple bucks. I'm not saying you got to do some crazy amount, just a couple bucks or whatever. One more time, click their link in the description, and I appreciate all of you who join me in these give back missions. YouTube seems to think that you'll enjoy enjoy watching this video right here next. And so please give it a watch, give it a click. Of course, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And I'm just so grateful for you making it this far into the video. I have the best subscribers on YouTube, and I'll see you guys in the next video.